Good evening. There's another debate on asset sales in Christchurch, and it's continuing to frustrate some councillors. Tonight, Andrew Turner and Yanni Johansson are my guests, and Lynched starts right now. Great to have your company tonight. Asset sales, it's an argument that continues to this day. So to cover its $1 billion debt, the Christchurch City Council is looking at selling around $750 million of assets. But 6 Labour-aligned city councillors of the People's Choice Group are proposing to slash the Capital Works program, which they say would save assets, or at least partially. Andrew Turner and Yanni Johansson are my guests tonight. Good evening and thanks for coming into the program tonight.
You're welcome, Chris.
So you reckon this is doable? Do you reckon we don't need to sell a single thing, Yanni?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at the scenario where you're finding out that you've got to spend more and more money, so the money that you're spending is going up, selling off things that bring in money to invest in things that lose money, like rugby stadiums, don't make a lot of sense. So I think long term, it's really dangerous to sell off these assets that raise revenue to put into the things that lose revenue. And essentially, I think it's a time to look, a really good look at the capital program. And if you look at that capital program, there are huge savings to be found because we simply cannot afford to do everything that we want to do, everything that government is telling us to do, and we don't have the capacity to even deliver on the things that we expect to do. So we've got
Is this too much of a short-term approach, do you think? Let's sell, and hope for the best for projects we don't need.
Well, that's right. And as the longest currently serving councillor, so I started out on the youth council, and when I started on the youth council, this city was in such a good financial shape because it had kept its assets. We were the envy of other councils around New Zealand.
But to be fair, that was before earthquakes.
That was before the earthquake. But what it showed was that by keeping your assets, you were able to provide high quality things like libraries, swimming pools, recreation facilities with rates increases that were at more modest levels. If you get rid of your assets, you then have a problem in later years because your rates go even higher than they would be.
Andrew Turner, what is the answer here? Because we have to do something, and some would argue, some of your critics have argued that if we don't spend this and that on the Capital Works program, for argument's sake, all we're going to be doing is delaying the inevitable, what needs to be fixed. What do you say?
There are some projects that need to be done now, and we don't dispute that. Equally, there are some projects that can be delayed and there won't be a significant effect by delaying those. There are other projects that, in fact, we may not have the capacity to deliver in the way that they're projected to be delivered in the budget.
So like what?
Well, for example, so the cycleways, there may well be land purchases connected with those that will take time to organise those land purchases. Some of the Big Banks Peninsula wastewater projects, there'll be consenting goes along with those, which will need to go through a normal consenting process and may well take time.
What you talk about, and correct me if I'm wrong, these all sound like nice things to be able to do, but not necessarily necessities at this given time. Am I right?
There are two aspects to the way that we can push things out, one of which is capability to deliver, so the sort of things I was talking about around compliances and so on, and the other is where there are projects that, yes, need to be done, but may not need to be done just yet. And of course, let's not forget, every time that we defer a capital project, we reduce the need for immediate borrowing, so we save interest, and if it's a capital project that would have an operating expense when it's finished, we defer the timing of that operating expense.
But isn't that part of the problem, though? Chris Hutching from the NBR was saying, although he admires the fact that there's an open discussion that continues to this day, he said to me on News Talks, it'd be a few weeks ago, he's concerned that if we continue to defer things, that delays things and the costs eventually will continue to rise. Yanni?
Well, no, I mean, I think, we have to look at what we're doing, and we can either defer things or we can look at the scope of what we're doing. And if you take the Central City transport projects, these are roads that have been temporarily fixed. They've had their skirt repairs. And if you take Kilmore Street, for example, Kilmore Street, the council's proposing to spend close to $15 million gold plating it and making it two-way. Now, I would question whether you really need to spend $15 million on one street for about 5 blocks when you've got broken roads in the east, broken infrastructure in the east that's not going to be fixed for the next 30 years. And that's a choice that we have to make as councillors, and it's a choice that the public need to be aware of, because all these fancy central city wow factor projects sound really good and they look really nice and all the graphic illustrations, but the cold hard reality of it is, I believe personally, we simply cannot afford to do it. And this has been a consistent view that I've expressed since the blueprint was announced, since the cost share was agreed to, and you've seen government backtrack over the blueprint and the cost share. They have continually refined the scope of projects to fit within shrinking budgets or less money being expended, and I think it's perfectly reasonable to expect council to do the same thing without selling off assets. Now, I just want to touch on one other point about the asset sales. I've estimated that over the next 30 years in our infrastructure strategy, if we sell off the assets, we lose dividends of $900 million. So think about that. We're selling, this council is proposing to sell assets up to the value of $750 million, but over 30 years, they bring in $900 million of income. So that's a lot of money that will have to be made up from rates further on down the track.
This really is a political discussion in every sense of the word, isn't it? Because on one hand, we have a government whose ideological sense is to sell assets. Yep. On the other hand, we've got a council, more often than not I suppose, that's made up of many left-leaning councillors who don't want to sell the assets. So that makes this thing incredibly political, doesn't it? So how are we going to move on to make sure that we're going to get things done though? Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, this is in some ways a political debate, but in other ways it's a financial common sense debate. And the figures Yanni just gave, you know, we're losing $23 million a year in dividends from these assets. There's a big outcry at the moment around the size of rates increases which are proposed in the council's long-term plan. It's the dividends from those assets which have caused the rates to be as low as they have been comparative to other cities over a very long period. If we're going to be losing those dividends, $230 million over the next 10 years, and that's a conservative estimate. That's a lot of money that's got to be made up from rates. So yes, it is a political decision, but it's also around prudent financial decision making.
This is not just gold. The concern, though, is not just a matter of gold plating the roads. It is an extension of that, isn't it? It's also the actual blueprint that, and some would suggest this has been forced upon the people of Christchurch. You know, lovely anchor projects that some of us, I would imagine, don't want or don't need. And I want to pick you guys up after the break on the stadium debate, because People's Choice is essentially saying have it deferred. Yep. But I would argue, why not cut it completely? That's next on Lynched.
With all the latest innovations in the world of technology, Shift has everything you need to stay informed and in the know. Shift, 2:15 on Monday, right here on CTV.
Opus is recreating the heart of Canterbury. From large-scale projects to commercial buildings. Your design, your vision. Opus.
Colour in your life. Colour Steel, the roof of New Zealand.
diversity, no deposit, instant finance, convenience, open 7 days. Austin Motor Company.
Drive It showcases the new arrivals to the motoring world, comparing and testing the latest models to discover which one is the best. Drive It, Sunday afternoons at 2:30, only on CTV.
Welcome back to Lynched here on CTV. My guests tonight are councillors Andrew Turner and Yanni Johansson. Guys, in terms of this Blimmin Stadium, where are we at with this? Because I'm confused. On one hand, we've got people saying, look, it's been deferred to 2025, don't worry about it. But it still doesn't, that still mean, it's still in the budget though, isn't it? So essentially, if we were to cut this monstrosity out of, I can't even say the word, if we cut that out of the long-term plan completely, that's half the problem solved, isn't it, Yanni?
Well, it's not half the problem solved. It's some of the problem solved. And, you know, I think I tried to get it taken off the budget. The Mayor ruled my resolution out of order. And I said, we have to show that we are going to replace the stadium, because as we negotiate with our insurer, our policy is one where you only get paid out the cost if you are committed to rebuilding or repairing.
Right.
So you can't just take it off your infrastructure plan over the life of 30 years, but what you can do is move it past the 10-year financial program that you have to get signed off with the Auditor General and with your community. So I think, personally, we should take it off the budget, put it outside of that 10-year window, and in the meantime, we can work through what the options are. I mean, there's still no clarity about whether the existing stadium can be fixed, the old Lancaster Park, or whether it is a total write-off and it's a new build. Now, that's a matter for our insurance negotiations with our insurer, and there's much better experts placed to provide that answer.
I was going to bring up in this, of course, the program you're watching now is recorded, but no doubt by the time this broadcast, it'll be still going on, the argument regarding Lancaster Park. Andrew, it seems like an absolute mess, doesn't it? On one hand, I mean, is this thing fixable? Is it not fixable? I understand what Yanni is saying, is in order to get the insurance payout, you need to make sure that we're telling the insurers we're going to rebuild something. What is your sense of all of this?
Well, this is an insurance decision, not a decision for council. We can't make any decision around this until we know where the insurance situation lands. But what this does demonstrate is the degree of uncertainty we're working under as we put this budget together. Clearly, there's a big difference between what it would cost to repair Lancaster Park and the $253 million that's in the budget to put into the new stadium. Quite apart from the issues of timing and delivery of the new stadium, you know, of course, there's significant uncertainty around the issues of the insurance outcomes, and the stadium is just one example of it. There are more.
But bizarrely, though, the Local Government Act requires you guys to come up with some kind of plan, despite the fact you don't know the final settlements of the insurance issues, and despite the fact that there's an ongoing review of the horizontal infrastructure. So how on earth can you make decisions or a proposal without knowing how much money you will hopefully, touch wood, have to play with, Yanni?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, and that's why I can't see the sense in rushing to sell off assets, selling off your revenue-generating assets for this big unknown. I think it's much more prudent to wait and see what the true financial picture becomes.
When will we know that, though? Will we only know that once we've...
Well, the two key things to that are the horizontal infrastructure review that was supposed to be done by the 1st of December 2014 and is still not being completed, and the insurance negotiation. I mean, Council last year was hopeful, as I understand it, that we would have a global settlement within a very short time. Now, that hasn't turned out to be the case, and I don't know, because I'm not on that insurance subcommittee of Council. I'm not involved in the negotiations. But those are really big unknowns, and until those issues are sorted, then we won't have financial certainty. We can make assumptions, we can make estimates, we can approximate how much we might need, but I still think it comes down to the fundamental point, is why would you appoint private consultants to give you advice on selling off assets already ahead of the conclusion of the public consultation and before those final decisions are made? And why would you sell a huge amount of your assets off in the first financial year when you've still got a lot of projects that aren't going to be delivered until the end of that year's timetable.
That's what I wanted to pick you up on, because my understanding is Cameron Partners have been engaged again by council to look at its options when it comes to asset sales. I thought they've already looked at that. And question number 2, as you rightly point out, Eugenie Sage was on News Talks a while ago saying, well, hang on, Cameron Partners is an organisation that has prepared companies for asset sales in the past. So in a way, would the concern there be, Andrew, this is a foregone conclusion, who decided to employ Cameron Partners in the first place? Is it the senior managers within council?
Well, a recommendation came to council, and that and it came by way of resolution. That resolution was passed by a majority of council. That doesn't mean that everybody around the table was in agreement with it.
But do you worry, is the notion there, or the inference to suggest that Cameron Partners is being engaged to get ready to sell bits and pieces?
That's the point that a number of People's Choice councillors made around the council table.
So why have submissions or consultation then if it's looking like it's a predetermined situation, or am I jumping the gun?
Well, no, I think you need to ask the councillors that voted to get that advice and to hire Cameron and Partners why they chose to do it then. I mean, one of the things in that report, which is really interesting, was that the cost of these consultants, and let me not go there, I mean, that's a huge issue, just the cost
don't you get me started on consultants.
of how much we pay these people
don't
to
get me
provide
started.
advice.
My hair's already falling out.
Right, okay, so, but that cost was going to be met through the asset sale program, and I would challenge that. I don't think you can
so hang on a minute. So you're going to fund things with the presumption that of a future sale?
I don't agree that you can do that. But, you know, we're trying to get those reports released. We think as People's Choice that we should be open and transparent around those sorts of decisions. People will want to know how much are these companies being paid to provide this advice, and people will want to know how these companies were selected and how it's going to be paid for.
Okay. I want to pick you up on something that's a few messages on my Facebook page regarding this when People's Choice came out with this plan a few weeks ago. Some of even your die-hard supporters, I would imagine from the left, had a go at People's Choice saying, why would you bother trying to create an A and B team when the Mayor supposedly, presumably, allegedly, is working so hard to have a council that's harmonious? Of course, the NBR reporter would suggest it's good for democracy to have these debates, but some of even your die-hard lefty supporters would say, why are you trying to fracture a council that should be having hugs and kisses every day?
So look, I mean, Chris, we went into this financial strategy with an open mind. We had pledges that we'd made during the election campaign, and we were committed to sticking as close as possible to those pledges. And what we've always said is we would only consider asset sales as a last resort. Now, I have to tell you that actually in the December resolution, there were a number of councillors that wanted to sell off a lot more than what council agreed to. So it wasn't us as People's Choice that was being divisive or creating that disunity. In fact, no, there was an element within council who, for whatever reason, believe we should be selling more. What we've had since that debate in December around the amount of assets that should be sold is we've got everything on the table. So this council is proposing that we sell from 0 to 100% of any asset that we own. Now, I would ask, how could anyone in the community make a meaningful submission around asset sales if the council's asking for such a wide ability to sell off anything and a small amount of that company or all of that company? Okay. So we haven't been divisive. We've stuck to our values and our principles. We have actually tried to come up with solutions where we can get collective agreement, but the reality has been there is a different point of view, different points of view around that council table.
Well, that's democracy.
That is completely healthy.
I don't mind that.
That is democracy, and I think we should celebrate the
Andrew,
fact
what
that
do
we
you
live in
say
a
that some of your
democracy.
diehard lefty supporters would say, are we going down the road of the A and B team again?
I don't believe we are at all. I mean, the whole council is still committed to doing the best for the city. We've just got differences of opinion about the best way to do that, particularly in terms of this financial situation that we've got in front of us at the moment. But there are no surprises for our colleagues in what the common sense plan actually contains. We've had informal meetings, we've obviously made statements in debates, we've put media releases out. Our position is very clear and has been very clear for a long time that we don't support asset sales and we don't support any sale of assets unless absolutely necessary, and that we believe that there is a different way to tackle this problem, which is around making savings and deferrals rather than this debate that we have been having through the council's own documents of asset sales versus rate rises.
All right, got to take a break. When we return, we'll discuss what Jerry Brunley has to say about all this. That's next. Stay with us. need to know what's happening in your region of Canterbury, join me, Chris Lynch, for CTV News First at 5, weeknights from 5, right here on your local channel, CTV.
Computer not working? Replace or repair? DIY or get a technician? Looking for parts? Thinking of upgrading? Need accessories? You've got questions, we've got answers. Global PC.
The preparation, the devotion, the fearlessness, the intensity. Runway model management. First impressions are everything.
Made to measure interiors, made with care, made for you.
Join Graham Sinclair and the team at Gone Fishing as they bring you great stories, fishing tips and beautiful scenery. Gone Fishing, Friday night at 8:30, right here on CTV.
Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guests tonight are councillors Andrew Turner and Yanni Johansson. Guys, Jerry Brownlee no doubt would argue instead of the council demanding the government gives the city more cash, Jerry would probably argue you've got plenty of cash. It's time to look inside the council to cut its own cloth. Andrew, has he got a point?
We don't believe we're asking the government for any greater contribution than is due. The cost share agreement provided for that review of the horizontal infrastructure that Yanni talked about earlier, that will produce a result, and all we're asking is that the government pay their fair share under the cost sharing agreement. We're already, as a council, looking for further capital savings and savings in operational budgets, and clearly the People's Choice Common Sense Plan urges that we do more of that work rather than less. So the council is looking within itself, most definitely, but all we're saying is that government should come up with its fair share.
Well, the government probably argue, hey, we're paying for the convention centre, stop your moaning, Yanni.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was one of the key reasons that council agreed to the cost share. I didn't support the cost share. I actually thought that the city having sovereignty over its major assets like stadium, like metro sports, like convention centres was a much more strategic thing to do. And in fact, I think if council had been able just to get on and do its central city plan, as much as there were things in there that I disagreed with, we would have a lot more progress in the city. We're still to have the convention centre. I haven't seen any plans for it. I know that council last week voted to give away Gloucester Street to the government to enable the convention centre to go ahead. This is a public road, a public access way that's been taken and put into a private development. So there's a huge cost to us as a city through the cost share and the blueprint that the government has put on us. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask them to pay, as Andrew said, their fair share of those incurred costs that we're facing.
Well, that's an interesting point you raise, actually, because I can't seem to get it out of any city leaders, either the government or Leanne Dalzell. Who is going to pay for the ongoing operational costs of this convention centre? Now, we know this is a fact, so people who say this is rubbish need to do their research. Convention centres across the world are loss-making ventures. They do not make money. The convention centre industry, do your research, is getting smaller with the advent of Skype and digital technologies. So why are we building something that's bigger than even last time round? To me, it doesn't make any financial sense.
Well, you need to ask the government, because they're the ones that set the scope, set the design, set the extent of what the convention centre would be. But I tend to agree with you. I think, we should have learnt from the Rugby World Cup, where we went and spent a huge amount of money upgrading our stadium. We were told as a city, you need to have a big stadium to get these games. When you look at the financial reality, and even the utilisation of that big stadium, it doesn't make any sense. People are staying at home, they're watching things on TV, there's new technologies, so we really need to see clear business cases before money is committed, before these decisions are made, so that people can be informed that it's a wise use of the resource. Now,
I was there for the initial blueprint hurrah thing at the council, and at the time, though, to be fair, there was a great sense of hope. There was a sense that something needed to happen in our broken city. It was a feel-good factor. Nothing wrong with that now. Council critic Hugh Pavlich would argue that the blueprint's been nothing more than a failure. Do you really believe that's the case when we do have things, to be fair, like the bus exchange is ahead of schedule?
Well, the
Justice Precinct is being built.
Let's look at those two projects. The bus interchange, we still have no clarity about who's actually going to own it. So we've got a major facility that's being built, ready to open in a few weeks, and we don't even know as a city who's going to own it, who's going to operate it. I think that's pretty concerning. And a huge amount of money has been spent on building it without any strategic thinking, I think, as to what is its future life and future purpose. If it was me, I would have chucked like community house on top of it, enabled some community groups to come back into the central city, maybe have some apartments above.
So you're suggesting that we don't even know who's going to own the bus exchange, whether it's the government or the council?
No.
Well, that's helpful, isn't it?
Private. So, you know, these are the things that I think the blueprint has failed to deliver on, because it needed to have certainty about funding when it was announced, and unfortunately the funding question has continued to go on and on and on and on. And even though you've had the cost share, you're still seeing, if you look at things like the southern frame, which was supposed to be a major cycleway and green corridor, no longer going to be the case. You look at the eastern frame, that's going to be full of residential, so the nice green picture that people saw when the blueprint was announced is not really what's going to happen there. And I think the most important point that you've raised is the ongoing operational costs of maintaining these hugely expensive assets, the depreciation
that might not be used on a daily basis.
Costs.
What I find interesting too, guys, I want to pick you up on this, is people say, oh, well, you know, libraries and swimming pools don't make money either. But the difference with those things is they're used every day by members of the public, so they can make a loss as far as I'm concerned, because we're paying to use those, and members of the public, use those every day. Sadly, people don't use convention centres or stadiums every day. We need to move on. We're vastly running out of time. Hugh Pavlich again was across the national media spotlight a few weeks ago now, saying the blueprint's been a failure and the lack of international investment into the city is concerning. Andrew, is he right? Do we have concerns about this? Because when I spoke to Leanne Dalzell, she was saying to me she is concerned about the lack of wraparound support regarding these blueprint ideas. And even Nikki Wagner has said she is a bit concerned too, because it's great to have these projects here, like, you know, Vodafone's coming back, great. But the wraparound support from the local businesses, there's no incentive for them to move there, is there? Because it's too expensive. I think I've just canvassed about 50 million things there, but do you know what I mean?
We haven't taken as a city a very joined-up approach to international investment or even local investment, it's fair to say. I mean, CIRA have done some work in that space, the council have attempted to do some work in that space, Canterbury Development Corporation are doing some work in that space, but it hasn't been a particularly joined-up approach. And going back to the conversation about the blueprint, the idea with the blueprint was that it was meant to provide certainty, which in turn would be a catalyst for private investment in the central city alongside these public projects. But when there's uncertainty around them...
But they're not going inside the CBD locked-off area, though. The private developers, for example, are building in spite of CIRA on the west side of the river.
Well, the central city has arguably moved west and will stay there. The challenge now is to rebuild the central city around the traditional Cathedral Square, Armour Street, those sort of precincts.
We've got 10 seconds left. Nearly out of town. Look into that crystal ball under the desk there. Will asset sales, will they be sold? Will some of our most precious assets, in your view, at the end of the day, will they be sold?
I'm really hopeful that people read the People's Choice Common Sense Plan, listen to the comments that people are making in the media, and through the submissions process, councillors make some really sensible decisions around the long-term future of our city that does not need to involve selling assets.
We're out of time. Councillors Andrew Turner and Jan Johansson, thanks so much for joining me on Lynched today. I didn't lynch you, did I? No? Good. that is our show. You can always join me on Facebook, facebook.com.
Are you trying to pull my hair by any chance?
we got more hair than I do. Right. Facebook.com/Lynched in NZ. That's our show. We'll see you next week.